Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into my official college football 2023 overall tier rankings video where, guys, I will be ranking every single Power 5 team as well as Notre Dame, putting them in different tiers. A few things before this video gets started. I made one of these last year at the same time, and my criteria for ranking these teams is what they've done in the recent past combined with their projected future outlook. In other words, I'm not factoring in if a team won the national championship in 1980 or 1997. This is based off of what have you done for me recently and where do you project. So it's like the past 3 or 4 years along with the future 2 or 3 years. How's your program? How's your head coach? Things like that. Let's get into the rankings, guys. The first tier, the best, no question about it. Probably just 1 or 2 teams will be in that one. The next tier, national title contenders. These are teams that, every year they have a goal and they have the talent to get to the national championship and certainly win their conference. Division contenders. These are teams, if they put it together, if they make the right moves, they could possibly have a run and win their conference or at least their division and make an appearance in their conference championship. Above average teams are just solid bowl teams that win 7 or 8 games, but they're probably not overall contenders for New Year's Six bowls, national championships, because they have limited talent upside. And then you have average teams. That's pretty typical: 5-7, 6-6, 7-5 type records. Below average is like consistent 4 wins, maybe 3 wins, stuff like that. And then the worst of the worst. Those are the current and possible future worst Power 5 teams right now, guys. Let's get into it. We have all of the teams right here, and this is going to be kind of a rapid fire thing. So we're starting it off pretty interesting with Florida. So we know Florida recruits really well. My initial thought with Florida, based on what's going on with their NIL and their program, either put them at the front end of average or the back end of below average. They do recruit well. They have a talented roster. I'm going to say the back end of above average, although that could be subject to change at the end of it. We'll see. Next, we have Missouri. I think, either average or below average right now. They did make a bowl game. I understand that. We could throw them on the back end of average, I'll say, right at this point. Oregon State, certainly an above average team, probably towards the upper edge of the above average. They get the transfer DJ Uiagalelei. They had a great year where they finished inside the top 20, and they had a really easy, good bowl win. Next, we have Texas A&M. Very hard to rank Texas A&M because they have the talent to be a national title contender, but they didn't even make a bowl game. So for A&M, based on their recent past, they did have a few good years with Jimbo. I'm going to say above average in between Oregon State and Florida. I know Florida's been better the past, year or whatever. But guys, I am high on Texas A&M, and this is not just based off of the past 3 or 4 years. This is also me projecting forward. So when I look at a team like Texas A&M, yes, they lost some players to the portal, but they also returned a ton, and they did sign the best recruiting class in history in 2022, and they've got a young quarterback who got limited playing time last year who looks pretty good. Next, we have Wake Forest. I'm going to put Wake Forest at the front end of average. They've been good recently, but they lose Sam Hartman. And really, before Sam Hartman, they were a below average team. So I think average is fair for them at this point. South Carolina. So South Carolina's had a really weird offseason. I would say the back end of above average based off of the crazy end of the year performances that they had. They lost a ton of starters to the transfer portal, but they return Spencer Rattler. So we're going to keep them in above average. You can certainly argue they should be in front of Florida, but I think we're splitting hairs. Those are two very inconsistent programs. Next, we have Vanderbilt. They've got to be one of the worst teams every single year in Power 5 football. No, it's just going to depend. Are they the worst? We will see. Next, we have Arizona State. So Arizona State going through a crazy roster rebuild, completely changing their roster. I'm going to say below average. I don't think many people are going to fight me on that. They had a few good years, like 3 or 4 years ago. Other than that, they've been winning 5 games. They didn't make a bowl game this past year. To me, they're below average. Arizona, last year at this time, I would have said worst, but I am going to bump Arizona up. Kind of similar to Arizona State. They played a little bit better this past year, but this is actually a bump up for them because they had a stretch in Pac-12 play where they lost like 15 straight conference games. 2 years ago combined with last year. This year they were a little bit better. They had actually a really solid offense combined with a horrible defense. It made for a lot of really fun games, but I'm going to say below average. Next we have Arkansas. So Arkansas, I'll say, certainly not a division contender in the SEC, but I'm going to say above average, maybe even in front of Florida. A&M is just so hard to rank right now. I mean, seriously, I would almost disregard A&M because they went 5-7, but they have a national title type roster or talent. But Arkansas returning KJ Jefferson, I believe they have a very hard schedule next year. It's going to be tough, but they've done a good job. They've constantly made bowl games, and they do return their quarterback. Auburn, I think Auburn's right next to Missouri. They've been bad really recently, and they aren't recruiting well. We'll see what they do with Hugh Freeze, but to me it seems like Auburn, until Nick Saban retires, they seem like a dead program. If I was Auburn, I would have taken a chance on Deion Sanders. I would have taken a leap of faith. They didn't do it. They got Hugh Freeze. He's won some games in the SEC. He's beaten Alabama. We'll see what happens. They certainly have a good talent pool in the state of Alabama. But of course, right now, the superpower is Nick Saban. Next, we do have Alabama. So obviously, Bama missed the playoff last year. But I am still going to put Alabama as the best. It's 1 year. They were in the national championship 2 years ago. What Nick Saban's done in terms of recruiting, somehow they've gotten even better at it, and I would certainly expect them back in the playoffs. So when it comes to talent, they're the most talented roster in college football. This is still Nick Saban we're talking about. I understand they had a down year this past year because they didn't have a legitimate number 1 receiver and maybe a shaky defense, but guys, still, it's not enough to where I can dethrone them from that tier at this point. Next, we have Baylor. So Baylor has kind of been a up and down type program. I'm going to say the back end of above average for Baylor. It was a tough year. They ended up finishing 6-7. They lost to Air Force in their bowl game. I think the Armed Forces Bowl. But I still like Baylor, their head coach, what they're building. They got a really interesting transfer QB from Mississippi State who's a solid 4-star. I like Baylor football, and you know what? I'm going to move Baylor up a little bit. I'm going to respect Baylor football there and move them up. Next, we've got Boston College. We're going to put them in front of Arizona and behind Arizona State. They are a below average football program in the ACC. We understand that. California, you can make an argument they should be on the worst. I'm going to say, boy, that's a dark logo. They're dark blue. I'm going to say back end of below average. They've had a few terrible seasons. They're having a really hard time recruiting in the Pac-12, and a lot of teams investing, like UCLA investing in the NIL with the QB. You've got Oregon. You've got Washington. I mean, there's a lot of teams in the Pac-12 right now that are playing to win. Utah, and it's very hard for teams like California. Next, we have Clemson. So Clemson, I'll still put it as a national title contender. I feel pretty safe saying that, probably towards the back end. I do have big questions about Clemson this coming year in terms of their defense and replacing all of the elite defensive linemen and linebackers that they lost. The issue for Clemson during the NIL age, which has been the last 2 recruiting cycles, they haven't been able to recruit at the same level that they were recruiting at during 2020-2019 when they were bringing in multiple five-star defenders. They do have a young quarterback who looks really good, Cade Klubnik, and they brought in one of the best coordinators in college football from TCU, Riley. So that's a big get for them. So I'll say back end of a national title contender, but they are a little bit suspect right now. Next, we have Colorado. So this is another very hard one to rank. Colorado, based off of last year, I mean, they were like the worst Power 5 team we've seen in forever, but they do have the talent upside with the transfer portal from Deion Sanders. So, guys, I'm going to move Colorado up towards the back end of average. I think that's fair. We have to factor in they did go 1-11 last year, but they are bringing in a completely new roster, and I do think 6 wins is very achievable for Deion Sanders in his first year. We will see if they end up getting it. Duke had a really good year last year, but I have to put them in average because I don't know if they can sustain it. They had 9 wins. They won their bowl game against UCF. Really good year. But this is a program that, again, if I was doing this last year, which I did, I would say they're the back end of below average, maybe even worst. They were like the worst Power 5 team, but they've also improved. So I'm going to say average. I'm going to be fair to them and put them there. Next, we have FSU. So this one is tough. Just based off of next year, guys, FSU is a national title contender, but if we're also talking about what have you done for me recently, I'm going to say division contender. That's what FSU's at. It seems fair. Yes, they are trending up. Yes, I do think they possibly could be better than Clemson, but this is a situation where FSU really only had their first real good year this past season, and they didn't even make a New Year's Six Bowl. So they return everyone. I understand it. But in terms of these rankings, I'm going to say division contender. I think that's fair. Next, we have Georgia. I think you have to put at this point, if I'm ranking it based off the past few years, you have to put Georgia even above Alabama. You win back-to-back national titles. I just can't. There's just no way I can't put them number one if I'm going by the past 3 or 4 years, what Georgia's done, the back-to-back titles, destroying TCU. They have to be slightly in front of Bama because they also beat Bama last year for the national title. And then this year, Bama doesn't even make the playoff, and Georgia wins the national title by 70 points, basically. So I'm going to put Georgia at number one. It's only fair in my opinion. Those are probably the only 2 teams that are going to be on the best tier in these rankings. Next, we have Georgia Tech. They're a below-average team. You can throw them in there right next to Boston College, Arizona. They haven't been good for a while now. They did fire their head coach mid-season last year. Look at this Illinois logo. It doesn't even fit. So this is the Illini, and you know what? I'm going to give the Illini the back of average. You know what? I am not high on Illinois next year. Illinois lost their good, young, up-and-coming defensive coordinator who's now the head coach for Purdue. And I think Illinois, they lose Chase Brown. They lose their number 1 cornerback. I see them coming back down to earth, but I do respect the really solid season Brett Bielema had, so I'm going to say back end of average for them. Next, we have Indiana. You could almost put them in worst. They're the worst team, or maybe the second worst team in the Big Ten. But if we still go back to just 2020, that great year that they had, yes, it was aided a little bit by the circumstances. I'm going to say back end to below average. They do not recruit well. They do not utilize the transfer portal well. They have a very talentless roster, and they're in a division, with Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State. It's very hard. Next, we have Iowa State. So Iowa State had a very unfortunate year where they went 4-8, but they actually had a positive point differential. I'm really high on Iowa State. I still think Matt Campbell is a good coach. I'm going to put them at the front end of average. I do think normally they're an above average team, but I do also have to factor in this past year and that 4-8 record. Next, we have Iowa. So Iowa did basically the impossible. They were able to have a decent season with possibly the worst offense. I'm actually going to move them in front of Oregon State. I think that, should I put them in division contenders? I just don't think I can with their current offense, but they're an above-average program. They always have a really elite defense. The problem we all know with Iowa, it's always the offensive issues. Next, we have Kansas State. So Kansas State, I'm going to say the front end of above average. I know they did make a New Year's Six Bowl, but I am expecting them to regress significantly in 2023 with the parity in the Big 12, with Kansas State losing their starting quarterback, losing Deuce Vaughn. I see Kansas State coming back down to earth and maybe being a 7-5, 8-4 team, similar to what happened to Oklahoma State in the Big 12 the year before. So I'm going to say I respect them, but I don't think they contend for the Big 12 division title. Next, we have Kansas. This is another team that's improved significantly. I'm going to say for Kansas, because they do return their quarterback, I'm going to put Kansas right in the middle of average, because I'm high on their coach. I'm high on who they return. And, they do have a very bad defense. They still can't recruit, but they should have a really fun offense next year. So, yeah, you could Auburn has more talent than them. I guess you could put Auburn in front of them, but Kansas is right there as an average team and trending upwards. They just need to recruit a little bit better and get a new stadium or get significant upgrades to their stadium. Next, we have Kentucky. Kentucky's an above average team. The past few years they've been decent. It was kind of a letdown this past year with Will Levis not playing very well. He still probably will end up a top 5 or a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. I'll say they're a solid above average team. I'd probably move them up even a little bit like right there, next to A&M. Two completely different teams. A&M has all the talent and none of the coaching. Kentucky has good coaching and limited talent, but they get Devin Leary, huge pickup from NC State. I am high on Kentucky. I'm going to say above average. I love Louisville, guys. What they're trending up as a program, I'm going to say back end of above average. ACC is watered down. There's winnable games. This team could win 9 or 10 games next year with Jeff Brom, and they've really done a good job of investing into their program. Unfortunately, they gave 2 kids NIL deals, and both of those kids ended up getting better NIL deals and flipping their commitment. So they got 2 kids committed because of NIL, and then they lost them because teams offered more NIL. So that is sad, but I do like that Louisville is investing in their program. Jeff Brom is a really good get for them. I'm going to say slightly above average right now. LSU, definitely with the talent that they have, they're loaded. I think you have to put them in division contenders tier. Just going back to 2019, one of the best teams ever. That was just 3 years ago or 4 years ago. A lot of people don't remember that. So I'm going to say right next to FSU, and both of those teams face each other, interestingly enough, in a neutral site game at the beginning of the season next year. I will say they're a team that's trending up, but I do think people need to hold on a little bit. They do go to Alabama. They've got a tough schedule. I don't see them making the playoffs next year. I know some people are predicting that. Next, we have Maryland. So Maryland's a solid team that's kind of fringe, above average to average. I think that's a pretty good spot for them, maybe right next to Wake Forest. They had a nice season this past year. I believe they're returning Tagovailoa, so that'll be big for them. But they do lose a number of playmaking receivers. That's going to be tough to replace, but Maryland, I respect the year that they had. They beat NC State. Good for them. Next, we have Miami. Throw a dart. I think I'm just going to put them in the middle of average. So they're getting the talent with the NIL, but I'm going to have to move them down a little bit, guys. I know they're returning Tyler Van Dyke. They've got Jake Garcia. They're a mixed bag. I don't know what to make of them. I don't know what their future is. I realize they're getting good talent, but we'll see. It's kind of like A&M to a lesser degree. It's like the light version of A&M. Next, we have Michigan State. This is another team. They were in a New Year's Six Bowl, and then they didn't even make a bowl game. So I'm going to say right now, I like Mel Tucker. I'll say slightly above it. Guys, I don't know really where I can rank them. Maybe at the front end of average up with upside. They got Kenneth Walker 2 years ago. What a pickup. They made the New Year's Six Bowl, and then they tanked. The one issue for Mel Tucker, and it's a consistent problem his first few years at MSU, the horrible secondary that they have. We'll see if they can improve it. I know he does a good job in the portal, but I have to be fair, and based off of recent history, even with the New Year's Six Bowl, you know what? They do have upside. We'll put them in front of South Carolina because we'll move them in front of Louisville a little bit there. So good for them. Next, we have Michigan. So it's very clear at this point, you have to say Michigan, based off of the last 2 years against Ohio State. They are a national title contender. They had everything go wrong against TCU. It's not an excuse. It's just what happened in that first half. Everything went wrong. 2 really good years. Jim Harbaugh, as long as he stays, is a great coach, and Michigan has to be labeled a national title contender. Returning Blake Corum, returning Donovan Edwards, returning J.J. McCarthy, and they've got a loaded transfer portal class they're bringing in with experience. So they've got to be a national title contender. Next, we have Minnesota. So I'm going to respect Minnesota and what they're building there and say they're an above-average program and really move them up a little bit, actually. Probably move them like right here. I like Minnesota, but I don't think they're going to have that great of a year in 2023 because they lose Tanner Morgan, but they always seem to have a good running game. They're coached really well. They're in the Big Ten West. There's winnable games there. We will say they're an above-average team at this point. Mississippi State, another team that's above average for sure. You know, I'll move them in front of Florida. I'll move them in front of Baylor. They return Will Rogers again. He's coming back for his, I believe, super senior year or senior year. And I'm going to put them right next to Arkansas and Kentucky. You could make an argument they should be moved up, but we're splitting hairs. And I realize, you know, they were better than A&M. A lot of these teams were. It's just hard for me to rank A&M right now based on how talented their roster is. I think if I'm being truthfully fair, I should probably move A&M down, but they just have such a talented roster. Next, we have NC State. So I respect NC State as an above-average team. They definitely flopped this past year. There's no doubt about it. It's just a situation where Devin Leary gets injured. You know, they were getting like top 10 hype in the preseason. I'm going to say above average, but they just don't recruit well enough to be a contender in the ACC at this point. Next, we have Nebraska. So I'm high on Nebraska, but right now I would say an average team, a lower-end average team. It's to be determined, you know. They've been horrible the past 3 years, but they bring in Matt Rule. They always have a great fan base. They have great support. You could make an argument they are below average, but the 3-9 year that they had was basically all close one-score losses, and then last year they didn't make a bowl game, but I am high on their future, so I'm going to say average with significant potential. Next, we have Northwestern. So, I mean, I'm going to put Northwestern right now as the worst team in terms of Power 5. This is back-to-back years they've been uncompetitive. I believe they were 1-11 this past season. There was the whole kind of joke with Northwestern where one year they're good, the next year they're terrible. Well, they've been terrible 2 straight years now. So I'm going to say right now they're the worst team. It's very hard for them to recruit with the academic standards. They are getting a new stadium, I believe in 2025 or 2026, so we will see. Next, you have Notre Dame. So Notre Dame, I really can't put them in a division contenders tier, right? I mean, I'll put them in it, but it is funny. They're not in a division, they're not in a conference, but that's kind of where I think they fit, right next to LSU. For a national title, I just can't do it with Notre Dame yet. And the issue is how bad they've been in playoff games against these top teams, against Ohio State, against Alabama, against Clemson. They have beaten Clemson. Guys, I'm close to moving Notre Dame up. I really am, because I'm just so high on this program with Marcus Freeman. But I can't do it right now in terms of a national title contender. I can't do it. But I do think Marcus Freeman is the perfect fit for Notre Dame football. Next, we have Ohio State. So the Buckeyes, to me, you know, I'm sure people will argue that Michigan should be in front of them. I'm putting Ohio State in terms of the past 4 or 5 years. These are the top 3 teams. It's Georgia, it's Alabama, it's Ohio State. Probably Alabama, in terms of the past 5 years, Alabama 1, Georgia 2, Ohio State 3. All of those 3 teams have the most talented rosters. I know people will argue that Michigan should be in front of Ohio State, but I think Ohio State, due to the overall talent upside, can beat the SEC teams, and that's why I have Ohio State as my number 1 national title contender. Obviously, you cannot put them in the best tier. They haven't won a title since 2014. So I would put them at number 1 in terms of the national title contenders. Next, we have Oklahoma State. So to me, they're really trending down. I know they've been good recently, but this past year was real bad. I think they fit right in the average tier. Maybe I'm disrespecting them, but that's where I think they fit. Next, we have Oklahoma. I am really high on Oklahoma football. at least I would say the front end, because we do have to see it with Brett Venables, the front end of division contenders. But guys, this is the best 6 and 7 team I've seen in my life. They're really underrated. They returned Dylan Gabriel. They're getting one of the best quarterbacks in the nation in the 2023 class, Jackson Arnold. So guys, their defense is also improving. Oklahoma football will be just fine. Yes, they had a setback, but they almost beat FSU in the bowl game. They've got significant upside. I think they're a division contender going into the future. And let's remember what they did with Lincoln Riley. They were very good. Next, we have Ole Miss. So I think Ole Miss is a solid above-average team. The SEC West, you're not going to be a division contender. You're just not. But I'll say they're a solid above-average team, maybe even in front of Oregon State, maybe even in front of Iowa, based on the overall talent that they have. And they did play Alabama really tight last year. Probably should have won that game, but they finished the season horribly, losing to Texas Tech. So, should I move them down? We're really splitting hairs on where they should be ranked here, but I'll just say right with Iowa, Oregon State, things like that. It's just based on their conference being so tough, their division being so hard. Next, we have Oregon. Oregon, at minimum, is a top-of-the-line division contender. Maybe you could even argue a national title contender at this point with returning Bo Nix and really how much they've invested into that program. We're splitting hairs. Do they go on the back end of national title contender? We can move them up if we're feeling nice. If we're feeling giving, we can do that. But it's just, I really like this Oregon team. They're investing all their Nike money. They're giving all these kids contracts, and they're really going for it. They gave Bo Nix a massive NIL deal to entice him to return to Oregon. Next, we have Penn State. This is another school I'm extremely high on. Are they a national title contender? Very similar boat to Oregon. Young, talented quarterback, good defense, very good coach. History says I just can't put them as a national title contender because they've never made the playoff, but they're at the front end of division contenders at this point. Penn State is a team that could crash the playoff party. I think they go 1-1 against Michigan and Ohio State next year. They win one of those games, and they might actually make the playoff for the first time. So Penn State, FSU, Oklahoma, Notre Dame. I'm actually going to move. Let's respect Notre Dame a little bit there. You know what? We might have to move Oklahoma down a little. It's just because they went 6 and 7. That's the only reason. We'll move them down a little bit. But yeah, guys, Penn State is for real. They're going to be amazing. Pittsburgh, I'm just not buying Pittsburgh this next year. They haven't recruited well enough, in my opinion. I'm going to respect them because they do make bowl games and say they're maybe a little bit I am going to put them in the above average tier. I'll leave them there because I have to respect what they've done recently. Purdue, very average team. They just strike me as really average. They had a decent year where did they make like the Citrus Bowl or something, and then they got crushed by LSU because they had no one on the staff. There is some uncertainty surrounding Purdue. What's going on with the head coaching situation? They bring in the defensive coordinator from Illinois. I'm high on him, but where's the offense coming from? I do like the transfer QB from Texas they brought in, Hudson Card. Next, we have Rutgers. So Rutgers, very clearly below average team, probably right next to Cal. They're better than Indiana at this point. They do have a decent recruiting base in New Jersey, but they just don't have the offensive talent. So they're certainly a below average team. They play in an extremely tough division. Stanford, moving on from David Shaw at this point, they're also very below average, probably right next to California and behind Rutgers. They've been basically a dead program for the past 5 years, or maybe 4 years, something like that. Next, we have Syracuse. So Syracuse, you can say, is the back end of average. They started out 5-0. They beat NC State, but after that, it was a total train wreck, and then they lose their bowl game, the Pinstripe Bowl, to Minnesota, and they just don't recruit well enough to maintain a significant, 8 or 9 win type seasons, things like that. I will say they're the only Power 5 team that has a dome, the Carrier Dome. And that's something, a weird fact that I found out. Next, we have TCU. So I respect TCU, but guys, let's be honest. You can't lose 65-7. I'm sure TCU fans are very happy they even made the title, but losing 65-7, That's an FCS level score. While also we're going to move TCU up because I respect what they did, and they did make the national title, but they had a lot of extremely close wins against very average teams. Let's be honest. They beat Michigan because Michigan had about 40 mistakes in the first half. I don't think they're winning their division next year. If I'm accurately ranking these teams, if you want to just based off the fact that they made the national title, if you want to throw them here, I'm not going to fight you on that. But I'm going to keep them at the front end of above average. I think they win 8 games next year. But you know what? We'll give Sonny Dykes respect. They did make the title game. I'll give him respect. I understand people are going to be mad that Oklahoma's in front of TCU. But guys, it's based off the talent. It's based off of also predicting the future. And remember, if I'm judging the past 3 or 4 seasons, TCU wasn't even ranked for like 2 straight years. And then they made their run this year, and they're losing a lot. Next, we have Tennessee. So this is kind of a hard program to rank because they've really only had 1 season where they've been super elite. But I certainly think with the coaching, the offensive upside, even losing Hendon Hooker and the receivers, they are a division contender. I would say you could even throw them in front of Notre Dame. I am not putting them in front of FSU, but they are a division contender. They had that crazy win against Alabama for sure. Texas Tech, a lot of people are high on Texas Tech. I'm going to say above average. I'm going to say in front of Baylor, behind Mississippi State. I think that's a good spot. Honestly, guys, I'm just randomly throwing these teams in. But no, I do think that's a good spot for them. They're a solid above average team. But I would say pump the brakes on ranking them inside the 2023 preseason top 25. Next, we have Texas, who loses Bijan Robinson, but hopefully Quinn Ewers is better this year. Texas is a really polarizing team because they lost 5 games, but there are a lot of metrics that actually had them as a top 10 team last year. They certainly have the talent. They've got Xavier Worthy back. I'm going to put them in front, probably right at the front of the above average tier. Honestly, I'm going to put them at the back end of division contenders. I think that's fair. I'll keep TCU in front of them, but they have the talent. We'll see if Quinn Ewers, the perfect number 1 overall prospect, can really step up his junior season. He is playing for, if he has a really good year, he could be a top 5 pick or something like that. Next, we have UCLA. So UCLA, certainly an above average team. With their current situation, I can't put them in division contenders. They're probably starting a true freshman QB or a transfer portal guy next year, losing DTR. But I do love Chip Kelly. So you know what? I'm going to show Chip Kelly respect, and I'm going to move them. I'll keep them behind Iowa. You know what? I'll move them in front of Iowa because I'm going to show Chip Kelly respect. Next, we have UNC. They just have no defense. They return Drake May. This is a team that I think has offensive upside. But guys, other than Drake May, there's no one on that roster. There's just no one on it. So I'm going to say the way back end of above average. Next, we have USC. So USC's story is always the same with Lincoln Riley. Definitely they're division contenders. I'm going to put them right next to FSU as one of the top tier. You know what? I'm probably going to put them at, they deserve it. They're basically almost national title contenders because Lincoln Riley's offenses are always amazing and they return Caleb Williams. The issue is just the defense. I mean, we saw it against Tulane. We saw it against Utah. It's just not good, but I still think with returning the Heisman, trophy winner, you've got to give them some respect and put them at the front of the division contenders tier. Next, we have Utah. So I love this program. I have a lot of respect for Utah. I'm going to say the back end, move them in front a little bit of some of these teams, maybe towards the middle of division contenders. They do lose their number 1 cornerback. They lose their top tight end. They did play pretty bad in the Rose Bowl. It was kind of disappointing, but I have a lot of respect for Utah. They're always normally pretty good. They coach up 3 stars. I'm sure they'll do it again in 2023, and they should be relatively good, even in a tough Pac-12. Next, we have Virginia. At this point, with Tony Elliott, they're trending way down. I would say right next to Georgia Tech. It's a mosh pit there in the ACC. Just not a good year last year. Brendan Armstrong regressed. One of the worst QB regressions we saw last year. Virginia Tech, I think maybe towards the front end of below average. Maybe you can say they're an average team. I don't know. You're splitting hairs. They have not been good recently. Next, we have Washington State. So Washington State, I think we can say pretty fairly is a solid above average team. Not much more, not much less. They do have a good home crowd, but other than that, it is what it is. I would say back end of above average, maybe even like the front end of average for Washington State. Next, we have Washington, so they're definitely a team that's going to be a division contender this year, and certainly we know their pedigree. They made the playoff already once. I'm going to say, I would say certainly in front of TCU, in front of Texas, in front of Washington, in front of Oklahoma. I'll leave them there for now. I mean, honestly, they probably should be in front of Utah. I just like Utah so much, but that's kind of where the program is trending, Washington. But they haven't been great outside of last year, and I do have questions about their defense. It was bad last year, and I don't think it's getting a ton better. We'll see. Second to last team is West Virginia. So with West Virginia, you could put them at the back end of average, I guess. I'm not going to fight you on that. They lose JT Daniels. They won a few games in conference play in the Big 12. But they're either the front end of below average or the back end of average. And then Wisconsin, this team I'm extremely high on. So Wisconsin is going to get moved up to division contenders, the back end of division. Well, actually, probably even moved up a little bit more because I don't see any other team winning the Big Ten West this year. Maybe I'm too high on them, but I just think Wisconsin, what they've done in the portal, Luke Fickell is the best guy you could possibly hire. They've invested into their football program. They always have a good defense. They do have a superstar running back who a lot of people are underrating right now. I think he's a Heisman dark horse, Braylon Allen. And, they're going to have better quarterback play. They're going to have a big QB battle with two solid transfer quarterbacks that have experience. This team is really setting themselves up for success. So Wisconsin, the final team, I'll say, is a division contenders. And that's all the rankings, guys, here updated as we go into 2023. This is based off the past few seasons and kind of a look ahead. Obviously, these are not perfect, and there's not going to be a ton of national title contenders. You could certainly move USC to a national title contender. You could certainly move Penn State. But, guys, what we've seen in recent memory, it's Georgia. Who wins the national title? Georgia, Alabama, maybe Ohio State, maybe Clemson, maybe LSU if they catch lightning in a bottle. That's what we've seen recently, and that's kind of how I'm judging the rankings here, basing it off of that. So, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.